Today, we return to Call of Cthulhu, and we push things right up to the edge.
Oh, come on!
Edge of Darkness for 7th edition was originally written by Keith Herber and has been revised by Dan Kramer with Mike Mason and Lynn Hardy. It's got some legacy behind it because it first featured in the Call of Cthulhu 5th edition handbook all the way back in 1992, and it's another one of those modules that often acts as an introduction to the game for new players. In fact, its 7th edition iteration is featured in the starter set currently, and it's a somewhat brutal, I would say, little tale where players actually have to roll up their sleeves and be a part of the dark magic beyond the veil that they're investigating. Just like my video on The Haunting, I want to make clear that this video is not a review. There's much better reviews out there. That's not what this is for. This is a guide to some areas of the module that I think a games master or keeper might want to consider tweaking a bit, messing with, to get the most out of the scenario for their players. I wouldn't be doing this module if I didn't see merit in it, because there's a lot to like about Edge of Darkness, especially as an introduction for players to how punishing the game is, but also how punishing it is just knowing about the mythos for their characters, and why the mythos is not to be messed around with for giggles. But before I provide my tips, let's give a rundown of the plot.
Hey, stop listening. This is a big time spoiler alert, and I will not be held responsible if you hear something you don't want to hear.
Our story begins in a hospital, where your old man friend Rupert Merriweather is dying and has invited you to the hospital bed he lies in. His wife Agnes and son Bertrand get kicked out of the room, and he explains in flashback that as a young man, Rupert and his very silly friends accidentally summoned a monster called the Lurker, which killed one of them and drove another one insane. Their response to this was to leave and never come back. But unfortunately, the Lurker still now lives in the farmhouse and may escape soon. So Rupert gives you a pile of stuff, and he tells you that the Lurker is now your problem for some reason. Then he coughs blood in your face, and he dies. Your players then read all the stuff he's left you and head on a road trip to this farmhouse. At the farmhouse, they find a dead raccoon, a dead lady, a crazy hobo who promptly hits you and leaves. And if they go into the attic, they find death. Instant death. With a box of ceremony stuff you find in the farmhouse and some reading material, your players will be able to conduct a ceremony to banish the Lurker. For that ceremony, they chant, and then they get dripped on with acid. And then they chant some more, and get attacked by a zombie raccoon. And chanting, they get attacked by a zombie lady. More chanting, where now the hobo is a zombie himself and he attacks you. And chanting, where you get attacked by a zombie bear. And chanting, when the Lurker turns up. And the Lurker says he'll make you rich or happy or whatever if you just stop chanting at it. At which point your players are likely to go keep chanting and make it sod off. Sorted. Don't run Edge of Darkness first. I mentioned in a previous video that both Edge of Darkness and The Haunting are the go-tos people suggest as first-time scenarios to run, and that is fair. Edge of Darkness and The Haunting share a lot of DNA, with its Basil exposition type setup, the signposted destination, the minimal cast of characters, the spooky house, and a showdown with said house's evil tenant. Edge of Darkness is like the Bug's Life to The Haunting's ants, the Armageddon to its Deep Impact, the Dante's Peak to its volcano. A lot of your preference probably comes down to just, well, personal preference between the two. And sure enough, I do honestly prefer the Haunting. I think it's got more fun factor, it has more opportunities to flex player skills, to learn combat, and it more naturally opens up a future plot hook or two. But my reason for saying to run the Haunting, or even something like Dead Light, first, isn't because Edge of Darkness isn't good. In fact, it's very strong in certain ways that I think the Haunting and other scenarios don't have. The Edge of Darkness is more Lovecraftian. You've got themes like the long time curse and the guilt of knowing something for decades, an ancient unknowable being that you just can't kill by shooting it or stabbing it. This adventure also lets your group put on robes and take part in an actual cultist ceremony of sorts, which they're not likely to really do as players as often, and especially not this early. So those are reasons I really think it is strong from a Lovecraftian perspective. But my reasons for running it second are the following. 1. It's a nice change of pace. The scenario gets your players who are probably based in a city, and it takes them out. It's got a slower build-up when you get to the creepy site out there. And though there are enemies to fight, the zombies and the reanimated animals are a nice weird shift from perhaps what they were expecting. My reason number 2 is the players benefit if they've already dipped their toe in the occult before this scenario, and will more likely play ball with doing stuff like taking part in the ceremony. My third reason for running this second is this adventure is actually, I think, a bit more lethal. It also has a much bigger chance of driving your players to insanity. There are several sanity drop moments. Maybe not to full insanity, but at least to, temporary insanity. Things that you can now better introduce properly to players that you wouldn't want to drop on them perhaps in the first session while they're still grappling with the rules, but are perfect for your second module. The only big issue of setting Edge of Darkness second is it becomes extremely unlikely that all the investigators would have a personal connection with Rupert. But one investigator still can, and that player can now have the limelight for this scenario as they ask the rest of the group for one big favour. Alternatively, by running it second, you can forego putting all the weight on a personal connection and just have Rupert straight up getting in contact to hire the group after what they did in, say, The Haunting. Maybe you create a lawyer character who says that while Rupert is definitely on the way out, he's already arranged payment for after he dies to do whatever he wants, as long as they bring back something from the farmhouse, perhaps from the attic, like an old satchel left up there. The point is, the bother of running this second is relatively minor compared to the benefits you get if you do run this second. While I previously pointed out that The Haunting has a problem with giving you a destination, but pushing all the flavor background info to the peripheral where your players might miss it, they might never go to research this stuff, Edge of Darkness has the opposite problem, where all of the backstory, all of the information is just pushed right out in front of the players from the start, and there's no information they need to find after that, really. They'll find more when they get to the farmhouse, which is where they were going to go anyway, but you're just given a briefing and then a pile of documentation. And the issue with this is that your players are meant to be investigators. That's what they're called. They're not adventurers, they're investigators. And they should feel like they've done some investigation, but there isn't any. You are just given this pile of documents up front, and there's no sense of accomplishment they get from that. What's more, it's a lot to read through at once, all of this. So to fix it, we need to split up some of this information dump and maybe make it a bit more challenging to get to. By that, I don't mean that you should lock any information behind skill checks, especially information that's necessary to continue the scenario. We don't want any dead ends. No GM wants dead ends. You should have Rupert give the same opening briefing to everyone, that they have to clear out an evil at a farmhouse at Ross's Corners. The player should have enough information that if they headed to Ross's Corners and asked about a farmhouse, they'd be able to find it, But we can change and add things to how the other information is presented to make this more of a mystery, more of a nice Easter egg hunt. So, let's establish what we have in the scenario when it comes to handouts, really, the key ones. We have a letter from Rupert explaining what needs done. We have a journal of Rupert's experience with the Lurker and the fates of the Dark Brotherhood members. We have a house key to the farmhouse. We have a deed to the farmhouse. We have an ornamental sarcophagus, which is really just plot fuel for future adventures. We have a police report on the death of one of the Brotherhood's members, Marion Allen, which the group can get if they decide to call detectives in New Orleans to get it. That's a lot of stuff, and apart from the police report, they're given all of the other stuff all together right up front. So let's split it up. What I suggest is, at the hospital, instead of the big box of junk, which, let's be honest, it's unlikely Rupert would have with him in his hospital room, Rupert can just have an envelope in his jacket. He urges you, fetch it from my jacket, the envelope! And in the envelope can just be his letter and also a key. Do you mean the big old brass key to the farmhouse? No. We're going to invent a new prop. A small, shiny key. Perhaps for some kind of post box or safe box, with a number on one side of the key fob and an insignia on the other. An insignia that they can figure out with any simple education roll or accounting roll, or by asking any Arkham resident, is the logo for the first Bank of Arkham. Because we are putting some valuables in a bank safe box. The deed, the house key, and the golden sarcophagus. Now, this is an easy mystery to solve. What is this symbol on the key fob? But it will make your players feel good, and frankly makes sense that Rupert would try to keep these valuable items secure and away from his slimy son, instead of in a box by his bed. As an extra touch, I like the bank to ask for a passphrase to actually access and personally open the box, and to have that passphrase be the last words that Rupert exclaims. Right after he coughs out blood, he can painfully gasp, Dark Brotherhood! But hey, what if your group don't get that extremely obvious clue? Let's make sure the investigators have seen the sign-in book, and they notice that one of the last people to access the box was Rupert's wife, Agnes, only a couple of days ago. It's always perturbed me that Rupert was supposedly tortured by this event for decades, but there is no indication shown that his wife had any idea of his suffering. It's also weird that the adventure doc advises Agnes to give clues to the players when she can't. They're all in that box that Rupert gives at the start. She's got nothing to give the players. So let's work on that. Let's give her something to do. Agnes is where we find the last handouts. Your group is probably going to visit Agnes after they see her name in the sign-in book at the bank. But let's make sure, let's add another possible lead for them to visit Agnes. How about when they first meet her in the hospital at the opening scene, she can voice how much she would love them to come visit her and to talk about Rupert. Just plant that extra little seed there so you've got a couple of reminders that they should see Agnes. When your group visits Agnes, she can explain that for some time since returning from a work trip, perhaps to Louisiana, Rupert had become unhinged, that he kept muttering the words, Dark Brotherhood, under his breath. It's another clue for the bank. What's more, Agnes has Rupert's journal. He was looking through it over and over and over. Now, apart from a brief glance, Agnes has not really read this book, but she knows it was torturing him, and she can say she took it to stop his frenzied state. But when Rupert was trying to find it, that's when he collapsed and was taken to the hospital. She can give it to the players, and maybe she can hand over a faded business card for a police detective in New Orleans. While no puzzles are solved here, you have now enhanced the themes of curse and guilt here, given weight to the journal, given a clear sign you might want to call New Orleans for info on Marion's death, And you've given Agnes some tragedy and character and a point for existing. If your characters want to read the journal, now you can say it'll take a couple of days to finish, just so it syncs up when they're more likely to be calling up for police records from the call to New Orleans. If they can be bothered to make that call. A lot of players can. The point is, you now have a lovely triangle of clues and items between the essential at the hospital, the helpful at the bank, and the background at Agnes's house. You have given breathing room and a mystery, and the players have the freedom to ignore all this and go straight to Ross's Corners if reading heavy isn't their thing, but you've given them a nice little mystery to solve. But wait. Why did Agnes visit the bank, you might ask? She can just explain that on her last visit to Rupert, he asked if she could get the sarcophagus that was on his desk in his study and asked the bank to place it in the safe box, away from Bertrand. And speaking of Bertrand is set up to be a minor antagonist in Edge of Darkness. Or so we're told. The adventure says that Bertrand can turn up at the farmhouse at the end to cause trouble. The problem is that Bertrand has no reason to know about the farmhouse. The farmhouse was secret, and he has no reason to know the investigators are there, unless he was following them, and then it's a little bit unfair that your players never got a roll to spot him. And frankly, he doesn't really have the screen time to justify being a minor antagonist. So let's fix that. First off, have Bertrand outside the hospital when your players leave. Now, if your investigators have been hanging around the hospital for a while, perhaps getting all the blood from the coughs cleaned off themselves, perhaps, coming up with a plan, well, that's great. They can walk outside and Bertrand is putting his elderly mother into a car when he spots the players. Or, if the investigators leave right after the coughathon, Bertrand can basically just be chasing them out, running down the stairwell. Hey, you guys! Have Bertrand, whichever case this is, meet them outside the hospital and just be super annoying and nosy. What are you sniffing around my pop for? His now deceased pop. And, have him clearly voice as well that, I don't care what my mother said up there. I don't want to see you talking to her. Don't come visit her. Don't specifically come visit her. Because it reminds the players that Agnes invited them to chat. And because whenever an asshole NPC in any role-playing game ever tells players not to do something, that is the thing the players will do. Don't do this, players will do it. Don't go there, players will go there. In this case, don't talk to Agnes, they're gonna talk to Agnes. So you're making use of him as well here as making him incredibly annoying. Have Bertrand turn up at the end of their meeting with her, either walking directly in the living room or turning up outside the house as they exit it. I told you to stay away from her! This second appearance isn't just for fun though. It's so you can have a more valid excuse for Bertrand to either now be interested what they're doing, more so than they were at my dad's bedside. They're now turning up outside his mother's. It gives him a better reason to turn up at the farmhouse. And you can also just say that now, after they visited his mother, he can go in and have grilled her, and maybe now she remembered something about a farmhouse at Ross's Corners, something that she glanced at in the journal. And so when Bertrand turns up, Bertrand has a reason to be there, or at least you can bullshit it a bit better. Why do you want Bertrand at the farmhouse, though? What good does he do there? Well, there are indeed two reasons you might want him there, and the first is the obvious one. Player replacement. One of your crew is pretty beat up or has even died. Bertrand can be a valid replacement. Standard stuff for Call of Cthulhu. But my preference is to horribly sacrifice him. You see, one of the problems with the ceremony that takes up the big latter half of Edge of Darkness is that it really just features waves of enemies coming at you. But if Bertrand turns up, that, say after the first wave or second wave, If Bertrand turns up with his car lights shining bright and honking his horn, it shakes up that pacing. So it's not just waves anymore. As he marches up to the house, hollering and yelling, "I know you're in there!" Your group can be yelling at Bertrand to go away, get to safety, or calling him to get inside the house to safety. Either way, it's when Bertrand is just arriving at the steps of the house that you can just have him jumped by zombie raccoon or zombie bear out of nowhere. Just tackle him to one side. And you've got Bertrand screaming on the ground as he's getting mauled. And your players at that point have a choice. They can either split up. They'll have to split up because someone needs to stay and keep doing the chant to rescue this guy. But they don't like this guy, and that's very dangerous splitting up. Or they can stay inside the house and they can watch Bertrand die horribly. But watching someone die horribly means losing sanity, so enjoy those sanity rolls. You give them a nice little hard choice there, and you also show that callousness to human life has an effect on sanity. It's a learning outcome for one of their first ever modules. In any case, you have made those waves of enemies more interesting by just sacrificing a Bertrand. We've talked about the starting location a bunch and the ending a bunch. But what about the middle of Edge of Darkness? Well, Ross's Corners is a nowhere stop. There's not a huge amount you can do with it, but you can have a fun encounter there that adds to the setting and provides a little bit of background. You're going to mention the general store that has a gas pump when your investigators pull into town, and they're likely to go inside. So when they do go inside, first off, do your players a solid and mention the kind of handy stuff that's here, like the canned goods, the oil, the tools, maybe hunting supplies like a couple of shotguns behind the counter. Do that just in case they didn't stock up or think of anything, because I know it says before they leave town they might want to do some shopping, but some players might just want to get right out. They might not realize how isolated they are. But more importantly, the general store is where you have a conversation with Ma Peters, the friendly owner of the place, don't you know? And while you're chatting with Ma, just when you hit a crucial bit of conversation, perhaps something a bit dicey, that's when you can have the local sheriff wander in on his regular drive around the county. Ma asked the sheriff, "Hey, has there been any word about the missing Maggie McFurder?" And the sheriff can shrug it off and moan, about, "Oh, no, I've just been, busting a bunch of hobos who've been around the area." Then he can turn to the players and the sheriff can go, "Hey, what are you doing here in town?" And if they, don't immediately answer, you can have Blabbermouth Ma Peters go, "Oh yeah, they're going up to that Merriweather farm." To which the sheriff can respond, "Hey, watch up out there. There have been wild dogs, killing a bunch of, local animals. They're probably rabid. You better watch out for that." This is a very simple conversation, but with this, you can establish, one, that there is lore in these parts, but it's minimal, and it's not based here in Ross's Corners. He drives around the county. You're not going to find a police station to run to. 2, he's told you that there are hobos in this parts, which, makes it make a bit more sense when you run into a hobo. 3, there's something killing local wildlife. This adds a bit of creep factor, and the fact that, the locals aren't suspecting anything when you find the dead animals, and of course, your players are more likely to quickly figure out these weren't killed by wild dogs. And 4, you've just established a sheriff character who he can turn up and be a much better helper or replacement character than Bertrand ever could. Here's where I'd like to recommend some of my favorite handouts for Edge of Darkness. Now, I actually use a blend when I run it. A lot of people mentioned Geedunk's handouts, which are good, but I actually prefer Tessa313, who's actually remixed a few of Geedunk's handouts and come up with some of her own, of which I especially like this farm title and deed. The other set of handouts, which I mix and match with, then greatly recommend, are some of the handouts created by RPG Nook. Now, RPG Nook has got a great review video of Edge of Darkness I would advise you check out, and he has created great versions of the diary, Marion's medical exam, and Marion's notes. Definitely check these two sets out. I am not a huge fan of red herrings in scenarios, in any adventure really. And there is a really, really annoying red herring during Edge of Darkness. A plot point that goes nowhere.
De Vermiis mystery.
It features in Rupert's diary, and it features in Rupert's letter, and it features in the wider Cthulhu mythos. And it really has no point in this scenario. In fact, the scenario goes out of its way to mention its existence and get you hooked on the idea of finding it, only to tell you that the only copy is locked in a secret section of the Orn library, and the only person who can give you access specifically tells you it's forbidden. Which itself isn't helpful because, again, when you have a character tell players something is off limits, they will want it and waste time trying to get it. And more importantly, this book won't help your group at all, so it is a time waste in every sense. So seriously, ignore the instructions in the scenario about how to handle your players looking for this book. If your players go to the library and hassle him about the book, have him just say, "We had a copy of
De Vermiis mystery.
but decades ago, it was taken. I think it was in the 1870s when all this was supposed to have happened with Rupert and his bunch." He can then say, "We've kept the loss of that book a secret." And he can then say, "I'm concerned you even know about that book's existence." And then make it clear that if they find a copy of
De Vermiis mystery.
they must bring it back to him because it is dangerous. This does everything the original adventure text does. It established the existence of a dangerous tome. But instead of hiding it in an arbitrary vault that your players are either going to waste time getting to or feel cheated out of, it puts this book out there in the world. You can use De Vermiis mystery as a hook in future sessions to, as something to find. Maybe the book's down in New Orleans where Marion was, or maybe it's with a cult from a previous scenario. Or hey, what about something even more nuts? You know how I said right earlier on in this video that you can hire the investigators through a lawyer and just say, "Fetch me the satchel that's in the attic"? Maybe in that satchel is the book.
De Vermiis mystery.
Maybe this is how they get their hands on their first ever tome that will open them up to crazy fresh danger. Or maybe in the satchel is just a few of the ripped out pages from the book, but only those pages that are in indecipherable Druidic. I'm not joking, that's apparently part of the book's written in Druidic. And maybe this will lead to mysteries. Where's the rest of the book? Or maybe again, it is the complete book in the satchel, but someone was messing with Rupert's mind and making him ill and convincing him to urgently get players to banish the lurker to retrieve the book in the attic, and by fetching it, your players are now playing right into their... Whatever it is, do something more with the damn book than say, "Oh yeah, it's there, but you can't have it." Because otherwise, you're just giving your players Cthulhu blue balls. Thank you very much for watching. I promise that the next module guide I do will be on another system that's not Call of Cthulhu. I was just really excited to do the Edge of Darkness and Haunting double hitter because those are the two key starting adventures. The next module guide I do, I promise, will be on a completely different system in a completely different kind of setting. But before I get to that, I'm going to be doing another RPG culture video. The last one I did was on dice, And I've got a few ideas in mind, but I'd be very excited if you guys have any ideas for RPG culture topics you'd like me to cover. So if you have any ideas, please put it in the comments. Either I'll cover it next or I'll cover it in the video next. Whatever the case. It's been really gratifying to see some of you subscribe and some of you like and some of you leave your comments. Really, it means a lot. I'm just doing this for fun, but it means a lot. Anyway, have a lovely day, and remember to always cover your mouth when you're about to cough blood on investigators.